I think we're going to start. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Edward Gonzalez Tennant. I'm currently the president of the Cedar Key Historical Society. I'm also, I do other things like archaeology. Some of you may know, right, that I've done some archaeological work in Rosewood and elsewhere. So what I want to do tonight, right, and we've got sort of a weird setup, so please bear with us. Obviously, and this is amazing, right, we have huge interest in what we're doing tonight, right, which is sort of, I mean, for lack of a better word, really kind of reclaiming, or at least, I don't know, re-unveiling, remembering the African-American presence, contribution, and heritage of the Cedar Keys, right? So that's why we're here. So obviously, a lot of people are in support of that. We kind of had to divide ourselves between these two rooms. So what we're going to do, at present, we have two of our speakers here tonight, which includes one of my favorite speakers, myself, but also Carolyn Cohen, right? So I should mention, before we get too far into it, right, that Carolyn has, we have her book, actually we have both of her books, or two of her books. She's prolific, right? We have two of her books here in the gift shop, which is at the front of the main building of the museum. So if you would like to pick that up and have it signed, right, we can do that tonight. I wanted to say that. We have no copies of my book, right? So, oh, that's just kind of sad. So I do have a book, right? But it's not here. So, so I should say, right, this event is a long time in coming, right? For those of you who are unaware of what I've been doing, I've sort of been poking around parts of Levy County for the past 15 or 16 years. First as a PhD student at the University of Florida, and now, right, I teach at the University of Central Florida. And looking at Rosewood, Sumner, now I'm looking more and more at the Black history here in Cedar Key. It's a fascinating history. Some people know parts of it, but we're still unveiling huge parts of it, right? So still discovering parts of it. And so several years ago, right, when Anna Hodges first reached out to me to serve on the board, first I was honored, but I was also really, I was concerned, right? Because I think some of us know, right, that African-American history is not always centered in the ways it should be in many parts of Florida. And obviously here in Levy County, that includes both histories we should celebrate, but histories we also need to commemorate and learn from, right? And so, I was very honest with Anna, saying, look, the work I do is controversial for some people. And Anna put all of my concerns aside and said, look, there's a lot of people in Cedar Key who want exactly this sort of thing to take place. And tonight, right, is really a testament to that fact, right? And not just in Cedar Key, but all of us who have connections to Cedar Key, Levy County, and really Florida in general. So before I keep talking, I need to thank some volunteers, right? We will unveil this after I and Carolyn do our thing, right? But this would not be possible without a number of things. First of all, we do have funding from Florida Humanities, so we should probably clap for that. That's a gracious grant from them, paid for the physical stuff, right? The actual materials. Everything else, from building it, designing it, installing it, was all volunteer, right? The historical research that goes into this is volunteer. The programming that goes into the interactive portion, volunteer, everything, right? So I should thank Diana Gonzalez Tennant. She's back there by the camera. Obviously, many of you already know Mike and Anna Hodges. Those are our other volunteers. I mean, Anna works here, but she goes above and beyond constantly, right? And so this would not exist without, right, that sort of community commitment, but also just straight up volunteer labor, right? So that's a huge, I think, a huge thing to understand, right? So the exhibit itself, we'll unveil it later. It has displays, right? It talks about African American history here in Cedar Key. There's an interactive component. There's also, many of you picked up these rack cards, right? So these are basically we've got 20,000 of them. We're going to make sure that this history is remembered for a long time, right? We're going to hand those out. They're free for anybody who wants them. We're handing them out across Cedar Key, Levy County, and beyond. All right, so if you find one, take it home and share it with friends. All right, so that's part one. So part two, yeah. So obviously we're here to celebrate Cedar Key's African American heritage, which, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, I do those things. I'm going to confess, right, when I first started doing work in Levy County, I focused on Rosewood, right? There's a political commitment there for me. This was a history I felt needed to be told. It was a history I thought archaeology could reveal some new truths about, right? I thought that was something I could help contribute to. For a long time, I, like a lot of people, assumed with the 1923 event, the violent displacement of Rosewood's black community, that basically this part of Levy County kind of emptied out its African American community, right? Basically those events drove those communities to leave. It turns out nothing could be farther from the truth, right? A vibrant African American community persisted in Cedar Key for generations, right? And so in some ways that's what this is about, is understanding that, but also framing it within a much deeper history, right? I think many people are aware, but if you're not, now you will be, right? African Americans, or at least peoples of African descent, have been a part of Florida's history from the first day European explorers showed up on these lands, right? Peoples, free and enslaved peoples of African descent, have been here since the 1600s, and they formed a vital component, right? After many Spanish and later other European explorers came and went, those individuals stayed. They made inroads with indigenous communities. Those inroads developed into huge communities themselves, maroon communities, right? So places where you had indigenous peoples living with, intermarrying, and producing families with peoples of African descent, right? That's a history that I think Florida is still only starting to understand. That pushes through, by the time we get to the 1800s here in the Cedar Keys, we have African Americans out at Senioti, right at the beginning, right? They persist through the Civil War. We have African American soldiers who join, right, the Northern forces. They're stationed here or just outside of Cedar Key during Reconstruction, the 11 or so years after the Civil War. We have African Americans. Some of the earliest African Americans likely elected to public office right here in Cedar Key, from mayors to aldermen and so forth, right? Then into the 20th century, the removal of a lot of African American rights in the period we call Jim Crow. We still see African Americans prospering in places like Cedar Key. They persist until, in fact, I've been talking with people who remember, right, growing up in Cedar Key and remember interacting with African American families who lived here, dozens of them as late as the 50s or 60s. So there's still so much to reveal or explore, or for a lot of us who are maybe not members of these communities, right, just to be exposed to and understand. And so I'll wrap up by talking about, right, a number of the things the Historical Society is involved in, right? So as many of you are aware, the last year or so, right, has been a difficult time, particularly for local history museums. Thousands of them have closed across the country, unable to survive the pandemic and the economic pressures that has produced. Right, the Cedar Key Historical Society has clearly survived, right, and even prospered to a certain degree. Part of that work is, right, members, right, people who come here and support that. Part of that work is the board's continued seeking of grants and external monies to fund work, to pay people to come to work, and all that sort of stuff. Our next probably big upcoming project, right, is ground penetrating radar and full mapping project of the Cedar Key Cemetery, which you'll see reflected on the exhibit, includes an African American burial ground, an area of that cemetery largely consisting of unmarked graves, right? Which is not uncommon for historical cemeteries in general, but also much more common for historical black cemeteries, of course. And so mapping all the marked graves, right? This is a full documentation of the entire cemetery and a ground penetrating radar to locate unmarked burials. There's no digging, there's no, right? I've never dug up a grave, I have no interest in doing so. I know that that happens, and I know there are reasons sometimes for that, but it's not something we're interested in. So if there are rumors about people like, you're gonna go disturb burial, that's not what we're doing, right? We want an accurate accounting of what's there so we can do our best to help preserve and protect it for the future. And then I'll end with this, right? So our most recent grant, besides this one, another state-funded grant, allowed us to do things like map storm surge threats in Cedar Key, but also convey the history of Cedar Key and threats like that via a complete virtual reconstruction of Cedar Key as it existed in 1920. All of those things are available on our website, so I'll end with that plug. And go to the website. If you're not a member, join. I think we're all members here, but enjoy that. It's a pretty cool resource, I think. And thank you for coming out. And sorry we don't have more room.